There are different ways of bridging the gap between feelings and logic, right? The feelings and logic gap is a big one, right? Because oftentimes that's where communication between men and women break down. Or more specifically, between the masculine and the feminine. Right? That's where it really breaks down, is that gap between feelings and logic. And there's a few different ways to do it. I'm gonna speak on two of them right now, right? The first one is what I talk a lot about. It doesn't take as much security as the second one. And this one typically just comes with the biology first approach, right? This is very front heavy. It's very front heavy. See, there's two ways of proving your masculinity to your woman, right? Or to a woman. And I'm not talking about proving your masculinity by like trying to prove you're a provider or this or that or the third. No. One way is of being very direct, transparent about your interests and your desires, right? What you want to do, and giving her the opportunity to reject or accept your offer. Transparency. That's the first way of showing your masculinity. And through following through with your offer, performing well, separating your ego from that dynamic until you've assessed where that woman is, right? Having conversations with her, because most men's egos, most men's insecurities are either, this is something Kay Zagan says, Kay Zagan 20, he says most men's insecurities revolve around sex, either directly or indirectly, right? So when you use the biology first approach, right? And from that stance of using the biology first approach, you create a judgment-free environment. A judgment-free environment gives a woman a level of emotional safety, right? When you learn to orient your ego towards how a person treats you in your presence, rather than focusing on what they've done in the past or what they do when you're not around, it's very easy to stay in a secure place, even if you aren't on an extremely high level of security. I'm just telling you some real shit. You don't have to be that secure to be able to do that one. But you do have to be dominant. This one is more dominance-based, right, than it is masculinity-based. Understand what I'm saying? This one is going to be more predicated on your dominance. Now, your emotional discipline also plays a factor. So that means that you have to vet properly, right? You mitigate certain things, right? You give the woman the freedom to be honest with you about how she feels about certain situations. And unless a woman feels a certain way about you and expresses that, and you see the signs that that's accurate, you don't put a certain level of trust in her, right? But you never fully put all of your trust in her. But there are going to be times of showing your emotional discipline through not over pursuing if she pulls back, right? Of understanding that women are women and sometimes they do goofy shit. That's just the truth of the matter. You got to understand that. You got to accept it. You accept the nature of femininity. You understand female sexual nature, and you move accordingly. Know what climate you're in. Now, from that place, you follow through what I talk about with the sexual polarity quadrant. You use that sexual dominance, because sex is something that bridges the gap between logic and emotions, right? It's like oftentimes when a woman is in her most feminine, not always, but when a woman is in subspace, she becomes very receptive and is a very vulnerable state classical conditioning, these different things. You teach her, you train her how to teach you. You train her how to treat you. You observe, you see what things would benefit her lifestyle, right? And you don't overly emotionally invest too soon. You pace yourself and understand that there's probably going to be times where she's going to fuck other guys. You just met her, right? But once she gets to the point where she wants something more serious, you set your standards as you go. So you have your standards set within yourself for what it's going to take for each level of relationship dynamic you're talking about. So there's transitional dating, right? And for me, how I talk about transitional dating is hook up, then fuck buddy, then friends with benefits. Then from friends with benefits, it branches out into the different type of dynamics that can be there. So that means that if that woman has the capacity to maintain, well, you got to know what you want, right? If you want a monogamous relationship, if monogamy doesn't work for that woman, then you may not want to take it further than friends with benefits or even fuck buddy, right? If you know you want a relationship to be monogamous, then you might not want to be friends with benefits with a woman and get that emotionally invested, right? That I'm just leave that there, right? But if you're cool with like polyamory and having that type of dynamic, then when you get to the friends with benefits zone, if she knows how to sleep with other guys and still prioritize you on a certain level, then from there you branch out. But your masculinity up front in a short-term situation versus your masculinity in the long term are two different things. Because the thing to understand for most men is unless you're on a level of cuckoldry or compersion or extreme security to the point of just indifference, a certain level of your sexual ego is going to be attached to your emotional investment as a man. Unless you're just already ready and built for the polyamorous lifestyle, the swinger lifestyle. And even in those situations, it's not impossible to cheat. So I say understand Brody's Law, right? Brody's Law is that some people always will, some people never will, and most people are somewhere in between. And this is what comes with things that may trigger you. So you do your part to mitigate certain things. Make sure you have the proper information. Make sure that you establish the compatibility on the levels that you need to be compatible. Transition properly. Don't take anyone for granted as if they're someone who would never do you dirty. Don't see anyone as someone who would never. Right? And if you do the things you're supposed to, they break those agreements or arrangements anyways, and you have hard standards about what those things are, then you either cut the person off, or this is where the other aspect comes in, right? See, the second way of proving your masculinity over time, and this especially goes for prematurely integrated relationships. This is hard. It's not easy, right? It's not easy. This takes a lot more security. You have to develop the ability to have a lot of security. And what I mean by that is, I think a great person to listen to when it comes to that would be like Jeffrey Setawan. Now, I'm more focused on Dom sub dynamics. A lot of what I say can be pretty front heavy at times. I admit that. Not everything, but some of the things I do say at times would include things that can be manipulation tactics. Again, putting yourself in a good position. But when you're integrated and you're in a long-term situation, it's not just about you. You still have to protect yourself, but feeling the need to protect yourself in a long-term situation where you're integrated with an individual can come off as emotional weakness. Being emotionally detached, overly stoic, can display emotional weakness. Now, a lot of guys ain't gonna tell you that. A lot of guys aren't gonna tell you that. You can be too masculine or have a false idea of what masculinity is. See, a lot of what masculinity is your ability to not be moved by circumstances. The ability to know what your objective is, to know yourself, to be secure in yourself, and to not be moved by the chaos that is femininity. And integrating your anima plays a very big part in that, because that's what gives you adaptability instead of having very rigid masculinity. You know, blades that people use for swords, oftentimes they have a certain level of flexibility to them. If they have no flexibility, then they break when they're put under pressure. Right? They may be too brittle, so the blade doesn't stay sharp. Right? It's something you got to understand. So you do need some flexibility within your masculinity, within your dominance. So when it comes to prematurely integrated relationships, listening to Jeffrey Sedawan is a great person to listen to when it comes to these particular topics. Now, to me, I'm bigger on polarity as far as the sexual polarity quadrant and the Dom subdynamics. I don't think he talks as much about Dom subdynamics, but he goes straight to the integration point of creating emotional safety. And the hard part, and these are things I've had to do before, when it comes to integration, when you're prematurely integrated, you have to have the masculinity to hear things that shift your paradigm of how you view the individual that you're with. Because typically, if you're prematurely integrated, your anima wasn't integrated enough to see that woman as a full person. So you typically are going to put her in a box as she's one type of person, and all of her behaviors, all of her actions should fit into this one box, and the way she feels about you should be this specific way, right? And the thing about the biology first approach is that you vet the woman through a strenuous process to make sure that the way that you want a woman to feel about you, her actions, her energy displays that, so your ego is going to be relatively safe going into that situation as long as she doesn't deviate too much from the process that you set in front of you. But when you didn't start off with that process correctly, then you have to understand that that woman may be masculine submissive, right? That woman may be a woman who loves you but may not have a certain level of respect for you. Most people would say to just walk away, but my thing is this: if you do something wrong with one person, I think oftentimes it's best to learn how to correct those mistakes before you take the same mistakes into every single corresponding relationship you have after that. Even if that person is one of those people who always will. Even if that person is somebody who does genuinely have character flaws and character issues, I think it's good to get to the bottom of whether that's really what it is, or whether or not you set up the environment in your program in a way that influences and encourages a person to be duplicitous, to be dishonest, to hide certain things from you because they don't feel safe with you. If that's what it is, then no matter who you're with, it's going to be a reoccurring thing. And things can start off good at the beginning, but eventually it'll get bad. And a lot of women who are a little bit more elevated in their thinking, who are integrated already, will just avoid you. Right? So then you end up getting a lot of bottom of the barrel bitches. Real shit. So, what do they call it? An attribution error? Let me look up that term. Real quick, let me look up this term. Yeah, fundamental attribution error. If you jump to the conclusion of seeing a person as flawed in their character because they make decisions that touch your insecurities and make you feel triggered, and you have an inability to see why they made decisions that they made and to see things from their point of view, to empathize with them, then it's never going to resolve the issue. Things are just going to continually get worse. Things are not going to be resolved. Even if your plan and your program and your instructions are things that would actually solve the situation, it's not going to work unless that's a woman who her femininity feels that way about you already, to where she's receptive to those things. If a woman is in her masculine energy towards you because you're prematurely integrated, the chances are you play the role of the feminine dominant, and you probably do things that are manipulative, that border on abusive, in order to get your way in certain situations. Right? Now, what Dom Sub dynamics at times can do is set up your program in a way to where those things that you do to leverage for power and control are consented on within that relationship dynamic. Right? Like when the emotional intimacy that your woman has with you is more tightly connected to the Dom Sub dynamics, then if you treat her like an equal, you treat her like a vanilla, that's kind of a punishment. Right? You don't smack her ass when you walk by. You don't put your hand around her throat. You don't spit in her mouth. You don't fuck her as rough or display that dominance. Then she'll feel like she's missing out on the intimacy of that opportunity. So when you communicate with her like equals, like a partnership, it's not going to feel the same. Then she'll correct herself and get back in line. Right? But to follow that path of sexual polarity, you have to understand that you can't be a masculine dominant and integrate with the woman over a long-term relationship unless your program includes a path for her self-actualization, and you have to listen to what her path of self-actualization is so that your program can benefit and bolster that to help lift her up. But when you're prematurely integrated, you're going to have to be willing to hear things that can hurt your ego and show emotional discipline in those moments to not shut down, to not get mad, to not be passive aggressive. Because ultimately, to be a masculine dominant, you have to reward good behavior. It's much easier to reward good behavior when you set up your dynamic in a way where a woman's already in her feminine submissive towards you. That way, the feminine energy that she feels towards you is already positive. The things she says, the things she feels about you are things that if she's honest with you about how she really feels, those things will stroke your ego. But sometimes you may be in a situation with a woman who's good to you, who's good for you, someone you could build something with. But because you've been prematurely integrated, you set up that dynamic in a way where she had to pretty much make a logical decision about certain things when it came to dealing with you, or had to sleep with you from a place of sympathy, right? Or was giving you Scooby snack pussy or whatever it was giving you respect on credit because you didn't know yourself yet, you didn't establish your program yet, you didn't know who you were before you met her. If she were to tell you what she really liked, what she really felt, those things change over time. I remember one time I was in a situation with a woman where when we were younger, she told me that her ideal man was probably like 5'8". You know, that's what she liked. That's what she was attracted to. She would be online, say that she wasn't really attracted to super muscular guys like that. It just wasn't her thing. But as I started to grow in my dominance, I started to be more exposed to female sexual nature. You know, we took a break, or we broke up, and when we reconnected, to my knowledge, she didn't fuck anybody else. But when we had a conversation about it, about what she was sexually attracted to, she was what Mr. Brown would call blue pill shawty. So she wasn't even really aware of her own sexual nature. So when I started breaking down what sexual attraction was versus regular attraction or physical attraction or overall attraction. She was just like, well, sexual attraction wasn't as big a priority for her. But if she really were to think about what she was really sexually attracted to, then a dude who's probably like 6'2", with big arms and chest and tattoos, that would be what she was the most sexually attracted to. Now keep in mind, I'm like 5'9", maybe 5'10", and I ain't no big muscular dude. So that hurt. But I didn't shut down on her or get mad at her because of it, but it did hurt. And one thing to understand about these type of scenarios is that the person who has the greatest level of access to what a woman is truly thinking and truly feeling is the person who her emotions are going to sway towards. So creating emotional safety through having emotional discipline to allow her to express herself and how she really feels gives you the closest level of intimacy to her, to where even if she were to meet a man who has all of those attributes that she thinks she likes, it's not going to be the same. It's like, this is one reason why dudes who are swingers or in polyamorous relationships, they're not really in jeopardy of losing their woman to some dude who's just super buff, right? Or just aren't always in jeopardy of just losing their woman to a man who has a bigger dick, who has better sex, right? Because their emotional discipline and their emotional intelligence is so on point that they're more secure than the average alpha male will ever be. You got to understand that concept. Now, not every man has to be polyamorous. Not every man has to be in the lifestyle. That's not the case, right? But you do have to learn how to have emotional discipline. I remember there was times with that woman where when we were younger, she said I was the guy she was the most attracted to that she talked to. And then there were times when we stopped talking and she talked to a couple other guys, and you know what, there was one guy she was more attracted to and another guy who she was just as attracted to, right? Who had similar attributes to me. But I'm like, I didn't get it. But that's how she felt. Now she chose me over him, right? She chose me over both of them. But at the same time, you have to understand that I do believe in protecting your preferences, but preferences can shift, right? Preferences can shift. I do believe in protecting your submissive sexual ego. I think that's an important thing. I practice that, right? And I think that one thing that limiting your sexual experiences at times can do is to protect your submissive sexual ego, so you're not putting too much strain on how masculine your partner is. Like a woman can do that, right? If she protects her submissive sexual ego, and if she has certain superlatives, right? You got to understand the concept of superlatives. If her man has certain sexual superlatives with her, avoiding giving another man the opportunity to overcome those superlatives gives his masculine ego the opportunity to not be stretched too far. Because not everyone's ego is going to be strong enough to handle certain things, especially based on the dynamic. If you want a monogamous relationship, then that's one of the benefits. One of the benefits of a monogamous relationship is that if you reach a point of being the best sexual partner, then it's going to be relatively easy to stay there as long as nobody cheats, right? As long as she don't cheat on you, if you're the best dick she ever had, you're going to stay the best dick she ever had. And she can use that superlative of an experience to bolster her attraction and her submissiveness to your dominance, right? Because in her mind, it's the best she's had. And some people say, don't worry about that. I'm saying it has its benefits, right? That's one of the benefits of monopoly situations, right? So those superlatives can be a benefit in those scenarios, right? And that's what protecting the submissive sexual ego does. Like for me, how I protect my submissive sexual ego is when I sleep with women, I don't focus on who got the best pussy. I don't. Because I reserve thinking about how good the pussy is for a woman who's in a position to integrate with me, right? But you're going to hear things. If you're prematurely integrated, in order to get to that place of that woman feeling that level of emotional safety with you, you're going to have to be willing to play that game almost as if you do, where you create that judgment-free zone. And it's much easier to create that judgment-free zone before your ego and your heart are invested in a woman than doing it later on when you already have an idea of who this woman is in your mind that you're happy with. Because where lies come from and duplicity and deceit often come from are when a woman knows that you cling to this idea of who she is, but that's no longer her or it's not true. So she'll lie to keep up with your ego, right? So there's a difference between lying and just protecting your submissive sexual ego. So like, let's say a woman fakes orgasm so that you don't feel insecure, playing the anima, right? Eventually that's going to wear down her keeping that secret. If another man finds out about that secret and you don't know, then automatically he has a certain level of intimacy and access to her true sexual nature that you don't have, right? And it's a similar thing can happen if a man can give her that experience that you can't give her. And that can happen. Like if, let's say, you are fuck buddies with a woman or friends with benefits, watch my video on the primer principle. These things can take place. Like let's say you're priming a woman up to have like squirting orgasms or G-spot orgasms. You've only given her A spot and then she starts squirting. That may really change her submissive view of you to not view you as dominant, as dominant, because she's had experiences with someone else that took her further. If you can't control your emotions, or you've already oriented your ego for a certain way that she talks to you or sees you or views you sexually, then when that situation occurs, it's not going to be as easy for you to maintain the way you feel about her when she doesn't feel the same way about you in that moment. But I've also had moments where that's happened and I was able to make some quick moves to take my spot back and to reestablish my position, and things worked out for a little while longer. But you have to understand that psychological reactance is a thing. So when it comes to proving your masculinity, like there's two different types of masculinity. It's different up front. Just you set a judgment-free zone. You don't become emotionally invested too soon. You set your standards. You go through that process of transitional dating. And then from that position of transitional dating, and remember, it's hookup, fuck buddy, friends with benefits. Then you branch out into either being sexually exclusive for a trial period. That works out. Your sexual needs are met, her sexual needs are met over a consistent period of time. You don't feel the need to fuck with other people, then you can make that a monogamous relationship. But don't jump straight into it. Because if you give your word about that, then you're held to your word as a man. Because you can go back from that trial period of monogamy to friends with benefits instead of saying it just has to end or jumping straight to a monogamous relationship afterwards. I've done that before, right? Like, listen, hey, when I was fucking with just you, I tried it. My sexual needs weren't met. Yours were, mine weren't. So you want to keep the position that you at, and you keep fucking with me. If you want to fuck with other people, let me know. But we'll have to, I can't give you the same level of access to me when you're doing that. You know, we'll have to have a conversation first and make sure you know how to properly separate sex from emotions in order to do that. And a lot of women, they aren't used to that, especially if they never really had that experience after being sexually awakened. So a lot of them be like, you know what, I don't even really want to fuck with anybody else. Now, some of them, they'll meet somebody, do it anyways. Some of them be like, nah, I'm cool just fucking with you. But understand, I do think that monopoly is somewhat of it's not the longest, most sustainable thing. I'm just keeping the buck with you. It can be, I'm not saying it's impossible, but for the most part, you should be trying to get to the point where your needs are met between each other, and then you can either transition into being monogamous or you transition into being open or swingers or whatever it is. But in order to establish your masculinity, there's that upfront level of using the biology first approach, transitioning, right? And then from that boyfriend, girlfriend, then you might go into fiance if you want to, and if you want to, go into being married, right? It's process to the integration, right? But if you're prematurely integrated, then there's certain ways that you're going to have to learn how to communicate, and certain ways that you're going to have to learn how to create an environment of safety that may not feel as safe to your ego as if you lead with your dominance from the jump. If you make her desiring your dominance from the beginning being a prerequisite of you having any type of investment in her, right? It's a different thing. So this is Coach